محمد الله وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم ثم الصلاة والسلام التحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين صلوات على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So we'll start by continuing the topic that we've been addressing in our series of the successful mu'min, and then we'll try to leave about 5 to 10 minutes tonight, and then depending on how many questions we get on the following nights and the subsequent nights, we'll see how much more time that we have to give for that, inshallah. So yesterday we started with the verse وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِلزَّكَاةِ فَاعِلُونَ. So the next quality of a successful mu'min and a successful believer is that we said they are active in doing zakah. So the first point was, what is zakah? There's 3 different opinions we went through. The first were mufassirin who say somebody here who is active in their zakah just means somebody who pays their wajib zakah. That's it. And the objection here by other scholars was that this verse, or this surah specifically, Surah Al-Mu'minun, was revealed in Makkah. It's a Meccan surah. It's a Makki surah. And normally, we know that Medina is where rules and obligations came. So it doesn't make sense for wajib zakat to be talked about so early in the Islamic mission. So the second opinion was that, so it's still talking about zakah, but zakah has a higher meaning. It's not just about the wajib 5% that's given on certain things. It's talking about charity and giving out in general. So some mufassirin accept that. The objection that's given is that it says وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِلزَّكَاةِ فَاعِلُونَ. The quality is that it's those who, regarding zakah or charity, is they're fa'il, they're active, they're constantly doing it. So some scholars say, look, if Allah wanted to talk about giving out charity, He would use the word for giving or paying. Why would He use the word for being active in it? It's like it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't fit with the noun that's being used here. So that's why we have a third opinion, which says this zakah that's being talked about is zakah in terms of purification, in terms of growth and self-development. So then when we flip this around now, we see وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ فَاعِلُونَ لِلزَّكَاةِ. Then it takes a different meaning. It means the next quality of a successful believer is that they are constantly vigilant and active in trying to purify themselves. And this lam in front of zakah is talking about the ta'aliyah, the illah, and the qasd. What is your exact purpose? What are you purifying yourself for? And over here they say that one is purifying themselves, and they're actively purifying themselves simply for the sake of purification. Not for the sake of people looking at them, not in the sake of monetary or materialistic benefits or anything else. It's just to get closer to Allah, and that's it. So now we wanted to say, okay, well, how do we become active purifiers? How do we actively go about, practically try to train and go through this self-development? Now, before we can discuss this idea of purifying oneself, sometimes this preliminary question comes about. And we ask ourselves, okay, right now I understand that I have to control myself. I have to engage in self-control. There's certain things I have to do and certain things I shouldn't do. But why did we even get stuck in this dilemma in the first place? Why would God bother to put us through this dunya, this world, where we end up having to control ourselves? If God could have, and He should have, why didn't He just put us straight in heaven? Why bother with all this and make us go through all these trials and tribulations and tests so that maybe some people may end up going to hellfire? Why bother with all this if God is so powerful? So in order to figure out what we should do for self-control, we should also understand why we engage in this idea of self-control. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So another way of framing this question is not just what is our purpose, but why were we created at all in the first place? What was God's point? Why did He make us? Why was insan, why were human beings made? So we can analyze this from 2 different perspectives. And you can analyze any sort of creation from two different perspectives. So for example, whoever invented the internet, what's the purpose of the internet? Why was the internet created? Right? Some say, look, the purpose of the internet is to bring information and networks together over long periods and long reaches of space and time, and store this information so that it's accessible to everybody at all times and all places. All right, this information superhighway. So that's the purpose of its creation. Say, okay, that might be the reason and the purpose of that specific idea, meaning the internet. But the people actually behind creating the internet, for example, the Defense Department of the United States, was that their specific reason in making it? Yeah, maybe that was one of the effects. But did the DoD, the Research Department, DARPA for example, did they design the internet for that reason? Did they do it so that people all over the world could connect on social media, for example, and gain all this information and communicate with one another? Or did they have some other goal in mind? Another example, the individual or the individuals who invented the modern airliner or airplane. So somebody like Howard Hughes. What's the purpose of the airplane or the airliner? Right? The modern airliner was made so that people could travel long distances over shorter periods of time, right, in quicker amounts of time, and be able to do this and eventually have to pay less money, right? So it could become more convenient. Was that actually Howard Hughes' purpose for making the airliner though? Some say no. He did it for money, he did it for fame, he did it to bolster his name as far as the economic and corporate considerations are concerned. He did it so that he could start something else. Maybe he wanted to travel personally. He didn't care about the rest of America or the rest of the world being able to utilize his technology, right? So the inventor might have a different purpose and actual goal than the actual invented object. So we have to ask this question two ways as well. We can ask, what is mankind's purpose and goal in this life? And we can also ask, what was God's reason for creating? So we're going to start with the first one, and we'll see if we have time to answer the second one as well. So the first one is this. What is our purpose in being here? Why were we made? What were we made for existing in this world? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So one way to answer this question is to try to ask God directly. Like, what is our purpose, God? And he answers this many different ways in the Quran, but one of the ways is clearer than every other way. Sometimes he'll say, I created death and life, or I created death, or I created life for this reason or this reason. But that's talking specifically about death and life. We want to know what was the reason for insan to be created, right? And there is an answer in Surah Al-Bariyat, right? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Meaning لِيَعْبُدُونِي, right? The only reason jinn and human beings were created was specifically and only so that they would worship me. That's what Allah is saying, to worship me. So now, we want to say, okay, we're trying to go about these discussions in a logical, reasonable fashion. Now, of course, we don't discount the Quran. Obviously, we don't want to do that. We have to stop and think. How does it make sense that the only purpose that we have here is just to worship God? Does that mean the only purpose that we have here is just to do a bunch of actions like praying and fasting, reciting Quran, going for Hajj? Like that's it? That's why God made us? That's our ultimate end goal and purpose? Doesn't it seem kind of trivial? Like, what real benefit is there? And some individuals, some of the companions had the same question when they heard this verse. So they say, some of the Mufassirin bring a narration where they say that the Ahlul Bayt expanded upon this. They said, إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونِي يَعْنِي إِلَّا لِيَعْرِفُونِي. That what worship really means, what God really means, the only reason that we're created, worshiping God means what? It means having ma'rifah of Allah. Coming to recognize God. That's the only reason we're created. Again, we can stop and say, what does that mean? What do you mean getting to know God? Why couldn't we just get to know God in heaven? Why do we have to go through this stage in the dunya, going through free will, going through all this good and evil, all these problems, this bala, trials and tribulations? Why go through all this just to figure out and how we have to understand and come to know and recognize God? Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So the real question here then is, why do we need free will in order to understand God? How does that factor into the equation? Couldn't we have been made without free will and just put in heaven and we could have understood God like that? Why didn't God just make us angels? Right? Angels don't have to go through the same problems that we do, and they still, let's say, enjoy some sort of benefit. So let's break this down a little bit. We know that there's two types of creations that we understand. That neither of them have free will, right? In the sense that we have free will. One would be angels, right? And the other would be animals. Angels basically obey God without any sort of hesitation. Animals, on the other hand, will purely obey God, but in terms of their lower desires, what we call animal instinct, right? They just go after whatever it is that they're commanded to do in order to survive. Angels, on the other hand, are given specific commands regarding worship and obedience to God. So we've seen many times in the narrations where they say certain angels are created just to do ruku'. So their whole existence is just in ruku'. Some are just in sujood. Some are just reciting certain tasbihat, like alhamdulillah. Some are saying la ilaha illallah. Some are saying istighfar, right? They're just doing different ibadat and they don't stop ever. That's what they're made to do, and they do this without asking any sort of question and hesitation. Animals, again, they're also obeying God, but God has made just inside of them this survival instinct. So the only thing that they go after is enough to live and survive and pass this on, right? Just eating, sleeping, and drinking, and procreating. That's all they do. There's no question about morality there. So there's no hesitations in them whatsoever, no free will. So now we stop and ask the question. We have two creations both obeying God without being able to deviate from God's plan, no free will there. After God makes these two types of creations, is there a reason to make anything else? Is there a reason to make something that has free will? Is there a reason to make something that obeys God and has a choice in whether to obey, and also has animal instincts, but has the free will and choice of whether to obey those animal instincts or not? So what do we say there? We say, look, the idea is this. We're trying to understand worship and getting close to God, and also understanding perfection, getting close to God and understanding His perfection, and also wanting this pleasure in life. We want heaven, right? We want perfection and happiness and that pleasure in heaven. We can ask a question. Do either the angels or animals understand what they're doing? Do they actually enjoy what they're doing? Do they feel any pain or real pleasure in the actions or obedience that they're going through? So one question we keep in the back of our mind. Now let's go to us right now in this world. If I were to ask you, I said, look, I want you guys to give me your opinion on what is the most perfect, let's say, halal restaurant, the best halal restaurant in the Orlando area. Now, in order for you to give me the best answer, or the right answer, how would you do? Right? You would have to go and start going to each restaurant that exists, right? If let's say you've only been to two of the, let's say 15 or 20, 25 halal restaurants in Orlando, you would never, you'd say, look, this one, the other one, but I don't know if it's the best one out of everything else. Right? You can compare whatever you've already been to. If you've been to one, let's say, gyro place, but you haven't been to this halal Chinese place, then you can't compare them yet. You haven't been able to because you haven't tasted it yet. You have no idea. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. If I were to ask you, let's go to a museum, and I want you, out of all the different exhibits, I want you to tell me which you feel is the best piece of art. Let's say you only go to the modern interpretations, right? You don't go to modern or classical art forms that are there. If you only go to one section there, and you come out and you tell me, I think this is the best piece in all of the museum, I'd be able to say, look, you didn't go through everything. How do you know what's actually the best? Until you know, you don't know. You have to see everything. And you can take this for any of our sensations, whether it's sight, taste, hearing, whatever it happens to be, even feeling, right? What's most comfortable? What feels the best? In order for us to determine what really feels the best, tastes the best, sounds the best, we need to understand as much as we can. The more and more that we understand, the more that we can start comparing and contrasting. So now, let's connect thing here. If you don't have good food and food, how are you able to determine what is actually perfect? How will you be able to actually enjoy the food that is available? If only type of food ever existed in all of our existence, would we ever be able to say that this is something that we enjoy, we take pleasure in it? If there was only one color that ever existed, right? We only saw things, let's say, in gray. Would we ever be able to enjoy the things that we were looking at? No, we couldn't enjoy that. We would get no pleasure from that. Same thing. Anytime that we want to gain pleasure or understanding of something, it's because we're able to compare it and look at its opposite. Light versus dark, short versus tall, knowledgeable versus ignorant. The value in free will that we're able now to judge different things and assign value. If we were only put straight in heaven and had no idea what things were like, we would be able to actually find pleasure in heaven. If we were to go there and just look at any food we want, we have nothing to compare it to. How do we know that this actually tastes good or not? If we had these, let's say, fine silk couches that we're able to recline on in heaven, if that's the only thing that's there in heaven, we never have uncomfortable chairs to deal with in the dunya to say that these are really comfortable things we're dealing with in heaven. We've got nothing to compare to. So the place of dunya is a place of perfection. Why? If we try to understand Allah, because Allah is just perfection. Allah says, I want you. The reason I made you is for you to understand me. And what am I? What is Allah saying? I am perfection, pure perfection. If you want to truly understand perfection and gain pleasure from understanding perfection, you also take what is imperfect. In order to understand Allah, you have to see everything else, not Allah. Ma siwallah. Everything that is ungodly. This dunya is made to see what is imperfect. It's made to see, look at what happened, you don't. That way, when we are able, inshallah, to get to heaven, we actually understand and benefit from and those things which gain and give us happiness. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So the reason that we need free will, the reason we have to go through all these difficulties in this world and not go straight to heaven, is so that we can actually recognize what is good in the first place. Otherwise, we have no idea. Otherwise, we're unable to understand that. So true perfection lies through imperfection. Or as this one famous advertising agency put it, they said, to get to heaven, you got to go through hell. You have to be able to taste some of those difficulties to truly understand what pleasure actually means. There's one narration which is attributed to Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Where he says, Inna Allah rakkaba fi malaika fil malaika aqlan bila shahwa. Allah has built and composed angels with an aql, but without their shahwa and actual desires, carnal desires. وَرَكَّبَ فِي الْبَهَائِمِ شَهْوَةً بِلَا أَقْلٍ. And animals are made with shahwa, with animalistic carnal desires and instincts, but they have no aql, they have no intellect. وَرَكَّبَ فِي بَنِي آدَمْ كِلْتَيْهِمَا. But in Bani Adam, in human beings, both of these things are present. We have both the aql and we have shahwa. We have an intellect, a real intellect, and we also have these carnal animalistic desires. فَمَنْ غَلَبَ عَقْلُهُ شَهْوَتَهُ فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ مِنَ الْمَلَائِكَةِ. And this is the famous part that most of us have heard. So if your intellect supersedes and dominates over your shahwa, then you're better than the angels. But the other side, وَمَنْ غَلَبَ شَهْوَتُهُ وَأَقْلَهُ فَهُوَ شَرٌّ مِنَ الْبَهَائِمِ. If we allow our desires, our animalistic trends and pulls and dispositions to overcome our intellect, then what happens is we become worse than animals. How do we actually control ourselves to make sure we don't end up as worse than animals? How do we make sure that we're better than angels? How do we actually engage in self-control? We'll talk about that tomorrow night, inshallah. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Okay, so now let's see if we can start going through these questions, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Okay. So the first one, this is still updating, but the first one here, okay. Yeah, I think it's there. So it says, please explain how parents can transition from the 0 to 7-year-old discipline methods to 7 to 14-year-old methods, are you not allowed to ever say no in 0 to 7? So this is a good question, right? Because it can be very, very difficult to actually make this transition. And sometimes, if we don't go through the details in Islamic parenting and disciplinary methods, we get very, very confused. So number one is this. The 0 to 7 and 7 to 14 and 14 to 21 numbers that are given are just general averages, right? They're not meant to be taken literally. I think I've mentioned this before. It's not the case that as soon as your child turns 7, then you flip a light switch and you start becoming harsh with them all of a sudden, right? That's not the idea. So basically what we do is this. As you are raising your child in the 0 to 7 phase, that first phase where they're the master, they should be as free as possible without harming themselves or other individuals. While you're doing that and you're teaching them and disciplining them through love and care and free play, right? That's the other important point. You start to notice which things, which characteristics in them are they starting to listen to you without question. Which things will they obey regarding you? Which things can you tell them and then they'll listen to you right away without saying anything, without hesitating. You'll notice that these are the things then you can start being a bit, not harsher on, but you can be a bit more, what's the word? You don't have to necessarily be free in terms of that, right? You can start saying, okay, it's time to go to bed. And that's it. If they listen to you in that, then you can start using more of a stricter method in that sense. Are you not allowed to ever say no in 0 to 7, right? So saying no will add up in a child. The more times you say no, they'll save this up and they're going to repeat this no back to you as well. The more negativity they hear, the more negativity they're going to respond with in kind. So what we can do is this. There's going to be clear things that we don't want them to have, right? So, one example was candy, right? So obviously we don't want our kids to have bags and bags of candy every single day. And we don't want to just also say no every time they ask. So what we have to do as parents is try to be as creative as possible, as ingenuitive as possible, is how can we convince our child on their own to not want the candy anymore, or not want what they want anymore, without saying no. Now I'm not saying it's easy, but again, that's why we're the parent and they're the child. It's our job to use our intellect, to brainstorm with other parents, to use the resources that are out there, and see what are other ways that I can speak to my child without saying no. Can I give them other options? Right? Can I compromise with them? Can I say, look, how about we have one small piece right now, after lunch, then you have another piece, and then we'll be done for the day. And just sometimes that compromise itself, because you didn't say no directly, is enough for them to say, okay, that's fine. Right? Or sometimes it's easier to make, especially when they're younger, to make a big deal out of their age, right? It's a big thing for our eldest daughter, right? Okay, you're 3 years old, so we only do 3 pieces of candy a day. Once you're 4, then we can do 4 pieces, for example, right? And again, as they get older and older, maybe you can increase even the explanations about why candy is not good. So even for our eldest, Hamida Fatima, we've tried this as well. I've tried to sit down and explain and said, look, this is what candy does to you. This is what sugar does to you specifically. So we talk about the body, what happens when it digests, how it affects her. I said, look, my job as your daddy, as your father, is to protect you. So when you have all this candy, then it's tough for me to protect you. I know it's going to hurt you. So I want to be able to do my job for you. Right? That's what Allah made me for, to protect you. And she's able to understand that, right? Because she knows it's coming from love. So if we're able to use these more creative ways, then our children are much more likely to listen to us. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So again, your transition is basically observe your child and see which things they're catching on to, the things that they're easily replying to and that they're accepting discipline and formal education for. You can start to use that more often. And the things which they're not so receptive to and they're saying no more often, be a bit more creative and see if you can offer some more solutions there. Where's Hajaga? I think we have another minute or two, right? Okay. So yeah. You can say no. If you do say no, it's going to come back and haunt you. Try to find more creative ways of getting them to disagree. Or agree with you, sorry. Second one is, what are the rulings regarding women reciting Quran in a tune in front of men? So I'll give a quick answer to this. So this will definitely depend on your marja, right? Some of the classical maraja, the ones of the past, most of them who have passed away, would not allow a woman to recite in front of men with a tune, generally speaking. Some of them say that it's makruh for them to recite in front of men, and others say it's makruh if it has nothing to do with Islam. Now somebody can make the argument that this is an Islamic thing, it is a religious thing. Now the problem here is that it'll also depend on the tune that's recited. And the tune that's recited will also go back to the discussion we had yesterday about music, right? So I don't want to go into the details there, we mentioned that. Some of our maraja right now may say, and again you have to refer to your own, they may say that if a woman is reciting by herself, this is not allowed. If a group of women are reciting, then this may be okay, but again, it'll depend on the way that she's reciting. If the group of women feel that this is leading to shahwa and the encouraging of shahwa in men, then they shouldn't be reciting it at all. So it's best if you consult your specific marja, because this specific issue, there's a lot of different opinions there. And if you want your specific marja's opinion and you cannot find it after looking at the website or the book on your own, let me know and I'll bring that for you tomorrow, inshallah. We'll leave the rest, I guess, for tomorrow night. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.